Right now, a powerful explosion has rocked Moscow. An invasion of Moldova. Chisinau has sounded the alarm. It's begun. A breakthrough from Transnistria. The decree is already on the table. Panic in Europe. Shocking details have already leaked online. Urgent. Putin has gone all in. The Kremlin has sent its drones straight into the heart of Scandinavia. NATO is at its limit. A lightning-fast response is coming, one that could tear Russia to pieces. Thunder over Moscow. Trump has shaken the information space with new statements. Direct and public. This is Russia's capitulation, Kyiv's triumph. This is the turning point of the war. And in Crimea, it's Judgment Day. Powerful explosions have struck the peninsula. The GUR special forces are already hunting for the Crimean bridge. And this, it seems, is its end. Shock. Moscow is in a fiery trap. Ukrainian armed forces drones are breaking through closer to the Kremlin every day. Is Russia's collapse really coming? All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot. Urgent. Things are heating up in Moldova. Maia Sandu is sounding the alarm. The country is on the verge of losing its independence. An invasion from Transnistria. Odessa is under a hellish threat, and Europe is in shock. Something unexpected has surfaced. These details have blown up the internet. Watch this.
Everything will be decided this coming weekend. Russia, by disrupting the elections, is trying to seize power in Moldova and overthrow the government, after which the country could be used as a springboard for an attack on Ukraine. President Maia Sandu addressed the nation with this video message.
If Russia gains control over Moldova, the consequences will be immediate, and they threaten not only our country but the entire region. Freedom of movement could come to an end, and our land could become a springboard for infiltration into the Odessa region. The Transnistrian region will be destabilized.
At the same time, it is precisely Transnistria that poses a particular danger today, according to experts.
Let me remind you, Moldova shares 1,222 kilometers of border with Ukraine. Moldova is a small country, but important infrastructure projects, so to speak, connect us with Ukraine, which is why the stakes are high.
There, traditionally, the population has the most pro-Russian sentiments, and the Moldovan authorities have clearly not done enough work with them over all these years.
Politicians have called on Maia Sandu to take control of Transnistria. This pro-Russian enclave is now a huge problem not only for her country, but for the entire European continent. Of course, it's not only her responsibility, but the leading role in this matter really does belong to her. If she had initiated the appropriate processes and changed the agenda regarding Transnistria, she would be facing significantly fewer threats today.
They decided to start fighting back only at the final stage. So, less than a week before the parliamentary elections themselves, Moldova began identifying and detaining possible participants in the unrest that the Kremlin is already preparing for election day.
This is connected to the planned forceful protests after the elections. The criminal world still remains part of this overall post-Soviet system of thieves in law, and so with the help of these people and these organizations, forceful protests were being prepared both inside the penitentiaries and on the outside. Just this morning, the police, together with the special services and the information and security service, carried out an operation to prevent these actions.
Thus, during searches on September 22nd in Moldova, 74 people were detained on suspicion of undergoing training in Serbia to organize rallies and protests. In particular, they were trained abroad in handling firearms and special equipment. For this, participants received about 400 euros. Law enforcement officials claim that Russian intelligence services are behind the operation, and the suspects are connected both to Moldovan political parties and to criminal groups. At the same time, the investigation itself has been ongoing since July of this year. But the use of force is only part of the Kremlin's tactics. After practicing in Romania, they also decided to use mass interference in elections through social networks in Moldova.
In other words, an absolutely insane number of short videos are deliberately recorded for TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook, and all of this is distributed in both Romanian and Russian, but with Moldovan themes, specifically to attract the attention of our citizens. And this is what they are betting on?
For those who are older and haven't mastered TikTok yet, there's a separate program. That very same Russian Orthodox Church, which has assimilated in Moldova, still pursues the same religious goals: complete subordination to Moscow.
One of the very solid and fundamental pillars of their distinct identity, so to speak, is the strong Orthodox connection with Russia, because this is a Turkic Orthodox people who, historically speaking, were supposedly resettled and established here by the Russian Federation, a significant historical event. And to this day, they express their gratitude in this way through their love for Russia. And so orthodoxy, specifically orthodoxy in the Russian style, serves as a point of connection and communication with Russia for them. And of course, Russia consistently uses this situation to significantly strengthen its political influence, as well as to substantially increase its economic and separatist influence over these particular regions.
At the same time, analysts remind us that Moldova's political system is organized in such a way that the parliament has significantly broader powers, including those related to the country's foreign policy direction. That is why government elections are almost more important than the election of the country's leader.
It seems to me that unfortunately there is a lack of this understanding. If we talk about society as a whole in percentage terms, there is a lack of understanding of the level of threat because people think, oh, come on, how many times has this already happened? We had the pro-Russian Voronin in power, then he was replaced, then there was the pro-Russian Dodon and he was replaced again. But all of that was before the illness of that very northern dictator reached such an extreme stage when he started attacking neighboring countries and sending drones over the European Union. And I think that if this time we end up in his clutches again, it won't be as easy to get out as it was in the past.
Experts also believe that this week will remain tense right up until the elections, which will take place this weekend. At the same time, the authorities are urging people to stay alert around the clock, since this is essentially Russia's last chance to steer Moldova away from European integration by relatively peaceful means.
The Kremlin lost the first phase of the hybrid war in the fall of 2024, when it tried to disrupt the referendum and the re-election of Maia Sandu. And now the struggle is unfolding for control over the parliament.
Urgent! Russia has gone off the leash again. After Poland, the Kremlin sent its UAV straight towards Scandinavia. NATO is at its limit. The alliance is already preparing a lightning-fast response. This could become a turning point. Europe is on the brink of full-scale escalation. Who is next in the crosshairs, and how does NATO plan to stop the invasion? Watch right now.
The war in the Baltics is already underway. After the incursion of 3 Russian fighter jets, which literally flew up to the Estonian capital, Article 4 of NATO was activated there.
We are convening consultations under Article 4. If you put together everything that has happened over the past couple of weeks, including the attack on Poland by 19 drones, this is already a systematic test of NATO. The 12-minute violation of Estonian airspace requires a decisive response, both politically and practically.
Yes, indeed, war with the Russian Federation is absolutely real. That's obvious. This is a demonstration to Europeans of their indecisiveness, and that NATO essentially is not standing up to the challenges.
Germany, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic said if provoked, planes should be shot down.
They are testing our resilience, our determination to defend ourselves. I think we must be extremely firm that if there are violations of the rules, we must respond appropriately, including by military means, in this specific case, by shooting down the planes. And only then will Russia very quickly realize that it made a mistake.
But any real action against Russia is still a long way off. For example, US President Trump has been avoiding this topic for several days now.
I won't say anything about this yet, but I will be briefed soon, and I'll let you know today or tomorrow. I don't like it when things like this happen. This could cause big problems.
Now, we are truly coming to understand the rather obvious consequences of the United States' persistent unwillingness, essentially to adequately fulfill its own fundamental obligations in ensuring European security. This is because, quite simply, Europe currently possesses no other viable options. They have nowhere to buy weapons. The military-industrial complex isn't scaled up. And there is no army. Everyone is ready to trade elegantly and live in wealth, but to be honest, in Europe they've gotten out of the habit of defending their interests with weapons in hand.
Moreover, information has appeared in the press that the US may even want to completely abandon the defense of the Baltic states.
Because, well, just recently there was significant news that the United States is steadfastly refusing to provide essential air defense systems to the vulnerable Baltic states, and moreover will most likely withdraw its military troops over time and is already significantly reducing its crucial military aid. This is exactly the complete opposite of what many European countries genuinely expect from the United States in the face of such blatant acts of aggression from Russia.
Russia has been staging provocations in the Baltics for 4 years now. For example, it is actively using an illegal shadow fleet there to transport oil. Estonia detained one of these tankers that lacked proper documentation. However, after an inspection, the ship was later released.
We will all monitor and inspect Russian fleet ships if anything suspicious arises. And Russia is getting nervous about this. This is an illegal way for Russia to make money for the war in Ukraine and to carry out hybrid operations against European NATO countries.
Right now, Putin, and this is important, by no means necessarily plans an actual military operation against EU and NATO countries. In other words, simply put, Vladimir Putin truly wants to achieve what he needs without resorting to an actual war, just by significantly escalating military threats around various European countries and clearly demonstrating their inherent weakness and utter inability to even adequately defend themselves.
Moreover, the Russians have repeatedly disabled communication cables between European countries in the Baltic Sea. Because of this, another tanker was detained off the coast of Finland. This time, the crew is facing criminal charges.
I believe the conclusion we can draw is that it's time to get used to a new reality. A lot of similar things could happen in the future. Of course, when something like this happened last year, the ship left the Baltic Sea, but this year we've already detained it.
Tolerating such egregious incidents, of course, is simply giving Vladimir Putin a free pass to continue doing this and even escalate the corresponding threats and aggressive actions. In other words, Putin's impunity will only further motivate him to continue raising the level of escalation, both against Ukraine and against the European Union and NATO countries.
As long as NATO countries hesitate, this clearly gives Putin free rein and makes it clear he can act with impunity, doing anything from minor provocations to a direct invasion of the Baltic states.
Sensational! D-Day has arrived. Trump announced the US is returning the occupied territories to Ukraine. After these words, there was an outcry in Moscow. The meeting with Zelensky became a turning point. What is hidden behind Trump's high-profile statements? How does the US plan to crush Moscow? Watch.
A turning point in the war, a historic statement, or what is happening with Trump? After meeting with President Zelensky at the UN General Assembly, Trump unexpectedly stated that Ukraine would be able to reclaim all its territories and might even go further.
It's clear that, step by step, he finally realized that Putin is leading him by the nose, that Russia is not interested in a peace process or in constructive dialogue.
Trump mocked Russia. They've been fighting for 3.5 years. So what? A paper tiger? He emphasized, with Europe's support, Ukraine is capable of reclaiming all its territories while Russia is only disgracing itself. A real military power would have taken Ukraine in a week, and Putin just has empty gas stations.
And yes, it was after this that US Republican Senator Lindsey Graham called such statements by Trump a turning point.
When asked what to do if a Russian plane enters some country, he said, shoot it down. He told Putin directly that he would sell Ukraine all the weapons it needs to continue the war, and very soon those weapons will be on your territory. Russia's a paper tiger. They've been fighting in Ukraine for 3.5 years, suffering losses at a ratio of 10-1 against them, and the Ukrainians have literally kicked their ass.
Trump is unpredictable. There is no certainty that this strategic partnership is truly collective, that the much-discussed NATO Article 5 actually works, where all member countries are supposed to commit their forces to support an ally in the event of aggression against it. That's why, at the moment, there are a lot of problems in the Western camp. And this rather turbulent situation is primarily due to the expressiveness and childishness of the American president.
There in New York, President Zelensky stated that Russia is nothing without China, but there's a nuance. So far, it doesn't seem like Beijing is interested in ending the war.
China is also represented here. It is a strong state on which Russia is now completely dependent. If China really wanted this war to end, it could force Moscow to stop this invasion. Without China, Putin's Russia is nothing. But China remains silent and detached instead of acting for peace.
Russia has become both a political and economic appendage for China. Therefore, any continuation of the war and further weakening of Russia will only drive Putin into even greater dependence, which China will use for its own interests.
Zelensky also noted that since the Budapest Memorandum has failed, Ukraine is building a new security architecture.
The Budapest Memorandum, which was supposed to guarantee Ukraine's security in exchange for giving up nuclear weapons, has failed. It has proven that international promises can turn into empty words.
That's why I believe that, indeed, especially against the backdrop of the complicated situation with NATO and Trump's isolationist policies, Ukraine will still manage to shift the focus of responsible European countries in a constructive direction and achieve new formats, new alliances that would positively impact the defense capability of both Ukraine and the continent as a whole. Because, well, today it's hard to deny that Ukraine is the outpost of security for the entire European Union.
There were also some awkward moments. The motorcade of French President Macron was stopped in New York. When he got out to sort things out, law enforcement officers said the street was closed for the passage of the US president. Macron immediately called Trump.
How are you? You'll never guess. I'm standing out on the street and they've stopped all the traffic here just for you.
The loud statements at the UN General Assembly, of course, provoked a strong reaction from the Russian side, with new threats directed at the US. Thus, Putin's press secretary Peskov once again said that Putin is ready to meet with Zelensky, but called it a PR stunt doomed to fail.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Urgent, the liberation of Crimea has begun. The Russians are simply being driven off the peninsula. This is a triumph for Ukraine. The SBU has already gone on the hunt. The strike of the century. The Crimean bridge is in the crosshairs. This will turn the main symbol of Putin's war into a pile of scrap metal. Watch the report for all the details.
The Russians are clearly having problems in Crimea. And the further it goes, the more surprises await the enemy.
Crimea is gradually, if we draw an analogy, thanks to the Ukrainian defense forces, turning into a sort of Krimobevka, by analogy with Chornobevka, where the Russian army, Russian occupiers, and accordingly their weapons and equipment are constantly being destroyed.
Ukrainian defenders have a clear understanding of where the Russian occupiers are located in occupied Crimea and are doing everything possible to drive them out.
There is active work being done in Crimea. The process of demilitarizing Crimea is ongoing. This is an integral part of the deoccupation process.
Meanwhile, in occupied Crimea, problems with fuel, water, and military equipment are increasing. Ukrainian strikes are destroying enemy bases while the Russians are trying to conceal the scale of their losses. We are talking about ground, air, and naval operations that our defenders are successfully carrying out.
Today, in Crimea, those significant Russian military facilities that pose a substantial threat both to the peninsula itself, precisely because they are strategically located there, and to other vital territories of our country, came under a coordinated attack. This critical military equipment is currently being actively used to launch devastating missile strikes on our sovereign territory. Accordingly, it is precisely what effectively enables the Russian forces to continue their aggressive actions, to conduct extensive reconnaissance of our airspace.
Enemy air defense facilities are being regularly eliminated, naval targets are being destroyed, and ground targets, including railways, are being struck.
The air defense systems in Crimea, which are currently operating very actively and trying to repel strikes from Ukrainian defense forces, something they are not very successful at, are also being used as weapons of killing.
Problems with supplies are growing on the peninsula, and the Russians' defensive positions are collapsing.
Work is also underway on those key points that will open the door to Crimea for us, in particular the Kinburn Spit, the Dendrovska Spit, and in fact the territory of Crimea itself.
Almost every week, the destruction of Russian helicopters or air defense elements is recorded. This creates an atmosphere of fear among the occupiers and forces them to conserve resources. Ukrainian drones even reached the government dachas on the night of September 22nd in the Foros area. Explosions rang out. Russian collaborators reported that drones struck the territory of the Foros sanatorium. It was reported that 3 people were killed and 16 wounded.
It is quite likely that this resort was actually the meeting place for high-ranking officials, possibly from the FSB or quite possibly the Russian armed forces. There is no objective verification, so-called, from the Russian side with the dead and wounded civilians. We still haven't seen any. And that's the first thing the Russian Federation would have done if it had actually happened that way.
The Russians kept silent about the fact that at the time of the attack there were very important guests at the sanatorium. Exactly who they were has not been specified. A notice was posted on the sanatorium's social media page stating that on September 21st, the Faros Hall restaurant would be closed for special service. All the news is showing the school in particular, which is located nearby. The school's assembly hall suffered the most damage.
Here, part of the ceiling has collapsed.
Just look at this. From the damage, you can see that the drone flew in through this window. Right now, there are fragments scattered everywhere here.
The Russians tried to use this school for propaganda purposes, even though it was closed on the weekend with no students or anyone inside, to cover up yet another of their terrorist attacks on our country. This is what the Russians always do. But again, it's not actually about hitting the school building itself, it's about the boarding house with the same name, Terletsky, which is located across from the school.
Nearby is also government dacha number 11, the Zarya facility. There's a helipad here, so the FSO is always present and can be called in to secure meetings.
We are demonstrating that today the defense forces can reach them with various types of firepower. The occupiers can be hit anywhere in our Crimea, in the north, south, west, and east. And today there is not a single facility in Crimea that cannot be struck by the defense forces. Once again, Russian air defense has proven its ineffectiveness. They are unable to protect either Russia or the temporarily occupied territories. The air defense system in Crimea is being destroyed. This is the path to the demilitarization of Crimea and, most importantly, to deoccupation. We are on the right track.
The fleet of Russian aircraft on the occupied peninsula has been reduced as a result of the successful combat operations of the Ukrainian special unit HUR Ghosts. 3 enemy Mi-8 multipurpose helicopters were hit, as well as the expensive Russian radar station Nebo-U.
4 helicopters were destroyed. In just a few days, 2 unique aircraft were destroyed. The B-12 Chaika amphibious aircraft, there are actually very few of them in the Black Sea Fleet. If I'm not mistaken, there are 6, and now 2 have already been destroyed.
The scouts showed footage of the operation and video of the wreckage of one of the destroyed helicopters. Occupied Crimea has become a symbol of a fuel collapse. A large amount of fuel was brought here to refuel Russian military equipment. As a result, there is now a shortage and record high fuel prices on the peninsula. The increase in gasoline prices is linked to Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil refineries. The video shows Sevastopol. In Yalta, gasoline was delivered to one of the gas stations. The line of people wanting to refuel is simply enormous. Neither the Russian authorities nor the occupation authorities in Crimea admit there is a problem. They insist that it's just a matter of logistics. Instances of human rights violations in Crimea are regularly documented and submitted to the UN Human Rights Council and the OSCE. The Russian occupation administration is forcibly conscripting Crimeans into the ranks of the Russian armed forces. Refusal to serve is punishable by criminal prosecution. In addition, there is ongoing militarization of children. Crimea is awaiting its return, and Ukraine is not allowing Russia to normalize the occupation.
Russia was urgently blown up. Major targets are burning across the country. An explosive apocalypse has engulfed Russia. The fire can be seen from space. Russians are fleeing in panic. This could be a turning point in the war. Watch for all the shocking details.
This is just insane!
A hellish night in Russia. A massive drone attack on various regions of the Russian Federation. Strikes have been recorded in Taganrog, Belgorod, and Valuiki. Ilgov in the Kursk region has been left completely without power. Next under attack is Ivashkiria. A video of a repeated attack on a petrochemical complex is spreading online. Let us remind you that back on September 18th, the Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat facilities were already attacked by drones. The company is engaged in the full cycle of hydrocarbon processing and produces over 150 types of products, including gasoline, diesel fuel, fuel oil, bitumen, and polyethylene. But that's not all. Crimea. At about 4:30 a.m., there were powerful explosions in the area of the Belbek and Ketcha airfields. The occupation authorities report that they shot down 16 drones that were flying toward the peninsula. However, local residents claim that the sounds were similar to incoming strikes and could be heard after the air defense systems had finished operating. But it's not just about air attacks. Cyber specialists have once again gained full access to all computers and servers of the self-proclaimed authorities in temporarily occupied Crimea. As a result, they managed to obtain more than 100 terabytes of intelligence data. And just recently, Ukrainian long-range drones destroyed 6 vehicles belonging to the Iskander operational tactical missile system at a training ground in the Krasnodar region. The photos show 6 burned-out vehicles on MZKT 7930 chassis and 1 based on a Kamaz truck. At the same time, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio ruled out the possibility of shooting down Russian aircraft that violate NATO airspace unless they engage in aggressive actions. Meanwhile, U.S. President Iram wrote that he believes the territories occupied by Russia will be returned to Ukraine.
The United States is pursuing a multi-vector political strategy aimed at reducing the military and political presence of the Russian Federation on the world stage. At the moment, there is a clear strategy essentially focused on isolating the Russian Federation, both on the global stage and accordingly in the post-Soviet space.
Thankfully, not everything is going well for the occupiers on the battlefields of Ukraine. In the southern Slobodansky direction, the enemy attacked the central and western parts of Vovchansk and also engaged in urban combat in Otradne in the Velikoborlutsk direction. The enemy's attacks also remain unsuccessful in the Kupiansk direction.
Putin needed significant control over the Dnipropetrovsk region to exert military and political pressure on the Ukrainian leadership during territorial exchange negotiations. This plan of the Russian command has failed.
Apparently, it is no coincidence that Putin dismissed one of his prominent generals, Alexander Le Pen, who commanded a number of operations in Ukraine. There are also rumors in the information space that the Russians are catastrophically short on weapons.
You are saying that at the moment, the Russian Federation is experiencing certain difficulties in providing means of striking enemy personnel. That does not correspond to reality. At the same time, there are major problems in the Russian economy. In particular, the Russian Ministry of Finance announced that it has proposed a bill to raise the VAT rate from 20% to 22%. Moreover, the tax rate will be increased starting January 1st, 2026. And supposedly the funds generated by the VAT increase are intended to provide financing for defense and security. In other words, what this means is that the Russian Federation is effectively acknowledging economic stagnation and a lack of funds to finance further active military operations on the territory of Ukraine.
Additionally, Indonesia could provide 20,000 peacekeepers to Ukraine and other countries where military conflicts are taking place. This was stated by the country's president at a session of the UN General Assembly, noting that peace must be protected and they are ready to take on part of the responsibility for this.
Moscow is in shock. Drones have become a nightmare for Russia. Every day they get closer to the Kremlin. The raids do not stop. But this is just a warm-up. Soon thousands of UAVs and missiles will strike the Russian capital. Russian air defense is bursting at the seams. Is Putin ready for the apocalypse? All the details are in the report.
Moscow and the Moscow region were subjected to another massive attack by Ukrainian drones. The first drones entered the area around 8 o'clock p.m. on September 21st. The sky over Moscow was closed to civilian aviation. Civilian planes were forced to fly directly over the skyscrapers of the Russian capital. Dozens of flights were cancelled, and the air raid alert in Moscow and other regions lasted for several hours.
From midnight to 7 a.m. Moscow time, air defense forces destroyed 69 Ukrainian drones and aircraft over the territories of Belgorod, Bryansk, Kaluga, Kursk regions, the Moscow region, Rostov, Ryazan, Samara, Saratov regions, and the Republic of Crimea.
This is not the first attack on the White Stone City. As recently as this spring, Russian experts claimed that Moscow's air defense was impenetrable.
The Moscow region has a deeply layered air defense system. It is one of the most protected megacities in the world. We produce various short-range systems, such as the Panzer Air Defense System and the Tor M2, which are specifically designed to intercept Ukrainian fixed-wing drones. The Russian leadership, even the president, are still dependent on what happens inside Russia. And when open discontent begins, when discussions start happening, their pompous statements will gradually be toned down.
And despite the maximum level of protection claimed by authorities and experts, it seems that Putin cannot fully protect the capital from Ukrainian drones, which are attacking Russia's main city more and more frequently. Even before the May 9th parade, air defense systems from all over Russia were brought to Moscow. But this did not yield significant results. Russia has formed a new air defense ring around Moscow, using old Soviet bases to quickly strengthen protection against drones and missiles. These air defense positions were deployed at the site of the former small defense ring, which was created back in the 1960s and 70s. Back then, these systems were intended to counter nuclear-type missile strikes. But they are not adapted to the latest means of attack.
They were designed for ballistic and tactical missiles, but today, that's a different model of warfare. Now we're talking about various types of strike drones, which accordingly change their direction of movement. They are also capable of striking from above, and literally right above buildings, which makes it difficult for air defense systems to detect them.
Currently, when it comes to Moscow's air defense, the Kremlin is not using new ideas, but rather Soviet-era solutions. On Soviet-era towers, most likely, radars are installed and possibly anti-drone nets are being stretched. But these solutions apparently are not very effective. Putin understands that sooner or later Moscow will become our priority target.
Such actions must continue. These are not missiles yet. We do not produce missiles in such quantities that we could launch them. But I am sure that soon missiles will also be flying toward Moscow. Then the tone of negotiations, the tone of Putin's conversations and his stories about how powerful their army is, how everything is going according to plan, that they can do whatever they want and we have no choice but to surrender. The tone of these conversations will change.
The new Ukrainian-made Flamingo missiles, with a range of up to 3,000 kilometers, will already enter mass production at the beginning of 2026. Ukraine is also expecting deliveries of long-range American ERAM missiles in the near future. This will give the armed forces of Ukraine the ability to carry out combined missile and drone strikes on Moscow. And the air defense definitely won't be able to handle them. Additionally, over the past month and a half, Ukraine has significantly increased its strikes on Russia's oil refining industry. A case in point is the fuel shortages in some regions. Now, a strike on Moscow. It's not the first and clearly won't be the last. Such comprehensive raids on the USSR strengthen Ukraine's negotiating position.